Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. How's everybody doing? And can you hear me? Absolutely gorgeous morning here, a Friday morning. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. Let me go ahead and read this title slide to you, just in case you cannot read. What's the point? Designing video game style field geology simulations for research and education, a talk given to us by University of Washington PhD student Mattathias Needle. And if you are watching this in replay, as most of you are, it's 11:46 a.m. Pacific time, and we're going to begin this lecture in 14 minutes from now. So you can go ahead and scrub ahead 14 minutes if you like. Let's see if the cameras are working. We'll get on camera. We've got all sorts of energy in the room at the moment, and that's because it's the last day of class, man. It's the last day of class. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We have more than 100 live with us at the moment. Where are you viewing from? Can I say hi to a number of you? And we'll just chew the fat here for a few minutes. But yeah, it's the last day of classes here at CWU. It's been a long school year. In some ways, it's been a very quick school year otherwise. Calgary, Alberta, Ogden, Utah, Gunnison, Colorado, Port Orchard, Washington, Red Deer, Alberta, Coos Bay, Oregon, Garrett, the Dutch Night Owl from the Netherlands. Hello, Garrett. Burlington, Washington, Deering, Kansas, Hood River, Oregon, Oak Harbor, Washington, Bishop, California. Hi, Bishop. East Line Street. I remember that. Dick is in the Netherlands. Foxy is in Victoria, BC, Tri-Cities, Washington, Bothell, Washington, Mount St. Helens. Ian, are you really at Mount St. Helens right now? Probably not at the visitor center since you can't get up in there. Maybe you're on the slopes. Minneapolis, Minnesota, Glen Head, New York, Roasty, Randolph, Wisconsin. Hey, Don, Los Angeles, California. Wonderful. North Central Idaho, and so on. So I don't know, should we have some guest appearances? Maybe we should. Kirk, you feel like you want to come on camera? Would you like to come on camera, Kim? We have some guests today, some longtime viewers, and I'll let them introduce themselves to you. Why don't you stand right next to me here, Kim? Where are you from, and what's your, if you want to share your name, you can.
My name is Kim Doctor. I am currently from Lake Chelan. Mm-hmm. It could be Barco Road in Northeast Tacoma.
Very good. Very good. And was it a last minute decision to come drive down to Ellensburg this morning, or you've been planning on this for a little while?
Well, it's always opportunist. Yeah. I am. So yes. I happen to be Lake Chelan, so perfect. Why not drop in?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Thank you. All right. Well, we've got others as well. We've got Kirk from Philomath, who brought a new batch of beautiful custom-made mugs, if you remember some of the mugs from the live stream series. So Kirk is an artist and brought a whole bag full of brand new coffee mugs. So I'll be unveiling those, and he's talking with Chris Mattinson right now. I think Chris is going to get a new mug. We have Rachel from Plain, Washington, who's chatting with one of our students. Anybody else want to be on camera? That's a no. Let's say hi to a few more of you, and then, some of you are saying hi to you, Kim. Don in Los Angeles is saying hi, and Mark and Papagino. Okay, that's nice. Yeah, I just, these Talk Friday things, I remember last fall, this is the last one of the school year. I remember last fall I was nervous that we'd have too many of you guys coming and joining. So I said, please don't come, because I wanted to get the momentum going with our students and everything else. But, as the year has gone on, it's become clear that there's, plenty of empty seats. And so more and more of the townsfolk have been showing up on selected Fridays. Steve from Liberty. And again, many of those folks are now in touch with our professors and in some cases our students. And so that's a really positive thing. I mean, we don't need to make a committee to talk about problems between town and gown. Let's just do it. Let's not do committees. A few more hellos. Where are you viewing from? And then I'll let you enjoy some of the folks. Rachel, you want to be on camera? You want to say hi to anybody? Okay. All right. Hello, woke ass Messiah from Eugene, Oregon. Nina from San Diego. Board retiree is in Little Rock Air Force Base in Arkansas. Kyle Ross says, "Sorry, I'm late." It's okay, Kyle. We'll let it go by this time. I think you'll enjoy today's talk. I'm not really sure what this is going to be about, but Max, our speaker, is dynamic. He's young, and so I'm optimistic that you will enjoy today's talk. Alberta Gary is down in Buenos Aires, apparently. Is that true, Gary? You get around. Mark is in Jefferson City, Missouri. Statesboro, Georgia. Kemmerer, Wyoming, home of J.C. Penney, if I recall, driving through there in 1986. Ian is on Starlink from Coldwater Ridge. Oh, Ian, you work for the Mount St. Helens Institute, and you can get up to Coldwater Ridge? Is that road open to your spot, but not open to the Johnston Observatory? Is that the way that works? That washout is just the last few miles of the road? Interesting. Cindy's in Waldport, Oregon. Okay, that's enough of me. Let's get you. Hey, Nick. No, hi, Greg. Honey Greg is harvesting honey in July and coming out west in August. That's terrific, Greg. I'm glad you're feeling okay. Okay, let's turn you around and once again, if you just joined us, we're going to begin the lecture in about 7 minutes from now. Thank you for joining us. Give me a second. Let me make sure these cameras are working. I had a little problem. Whoa. What was that about? Sorry about that. I hope we don't have more problems with the camera. Oh, you know what? Yeah. Okay, young man. Take your time. Take your time. Emptying the pockets. You might break into some interpretive dance. You never know.
I need cargo shorts.
Don't we all? Okay, so blue light is on, which means this thing is live, and I'm live right now, so they can hear you presumably at home. And I'm going to give that to you, and I'm going to just have you kind of do this on one of your pockets.
Okay.
And then up to you if you want to thread up through your shirt or just kind of have it kind of dangling, but I think we want to go about right there and clip it on. I can go ahead and clip it on if you don't mind.
I'll thread through.
Thread it through?
Is that okay?
That works. Max is threading his hot mic up through his shirt. Can you hear that, viewers? Can I double check that you can hear Max's microphone? Scratchity scratch. That's a good sign, Brian. Brian, you are Johnny on the spot with that. Tim Miller, are you the Tim Miller in the room right now, or are you a different Tim Miller?
Hi, everybody.
Oh, see?
Can you hear me at home?
Tell us a story, Max. Tell me about growing up in Pennsylvania. What was your hometown like in Pennsylvania?
My hometown is Allentown,
Oh,
and Billy Joel made that famous
he did.
with his song.
Us old people know about that.
Yeah.
You know that song? Yeah. Oh, look at
I know Billy Joel.
And I'm really proud to have grown up there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you still have family in Allentown?
I do. My
Okay.
parents are there and some extended family.
Do you want to make your way back there? That's a later conversation.
Okay, well, we're gonna keep your audio is great. Everybody says Max uppercase. Max's mic is working fine. 5x5,
5x5.
which means loud and clear.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So we're good. We'll just keep you hooked up if you don't mind. You can still chat with Hannah, but just letting you know people can hear you.
I don't think I'll use that.
Okay, we're up and running.
How has the teaching been going for you?
It's great. I have such a good group of students. Yeah.
It's great. But have you enjoyed the teaching experience?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's something you want to do.
We'll talk about it over dinner.
Got more than 200 of you now. That's
This
nice.
experience has been really
Thank you
positive,
for being with us.
and the CWU people, like, as a whole, are really friendly.
Yeah, I have. You want to use the candy con content.
Mhm.
She's awesome. But other than that,
I can hear you. It's okay. You're not going to say anything controversial. Okay.
Cool. Have you gone back to Arizona since moving here?
No, no. And, keeping in touch with my lab mates and my advisor. Yeah, not really. But plan to. I miss those guys.
Hi. I don't know if I recognize you. I'm sorry. Have we met before? Okay.
One of the first ones who married.
Oh, good. So do you live in town here?
Will you get it?
Oh, that's
Is there a
right. I do
possibility of that?
remember you now. Well, but we have a bunch of guests here today. That's kind of a
I'm
nice
sure you would.
surprise. I wasn't anticipating that.
I absolutely adore it.
Okay.
Guys, I know more than yeah.
We didn't get to
Well,
Sigma
remind me of
class,
your name.
Mario.
so
Mario. It's nice to
we
see
can
you
cover
again.
that with
Thank you
them.
for coming over.
Thank you for yeah, no.
Well, sh-
They asked me to come.
Did you go to school somewhere? Did you
This
go
is
to
great.
university?
This whole row
At a
right
different
here,
location at a different time?
7 of them are in structure.
I used to work for video games.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That was I have a degree of that.
And then you go off to field camp with
But life, interesting life. Thank you.
with OSU. My undergrad had a field methods course for a semester, so
Why do I do that? Why do I stand over
You
there?
have that power.
I gotta create a red circle and
Exactly.
don't cross the red circle.
yeah, and then we go twice as undergrads to the Adirondacks for a week. And then the field methods class is like
Okay,
a
home
few
viewers, I'm
longer
paranoid
weekends,
now, so can I ask
but
you one more
it's like
time?
all of
Is
Tuesday
Max
and
5 by
then
5?
Saturday and Sunday. And I was working at a music store at the time, and my boss was
Thank you.
very
Thank you,
accommodating
guys.
in switching around my schedule for that
We're gonna
semester,
start in 1 minute.
so that I could do that. But I didn't have a situation where I had to miss work for like a month.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, 'cause that's a lot.
And then my undergrad advisor, Sarah Tyndall, sent me out to Utah to collect some data, and I went out with a paleontologist in my department as well, who I also did some research with, and so I got to have like the Western United States field experience, but not in the traditional sense with a lot of peers. Like,
Okay, that's good. Gosh, 8 hours. Awesome. He trusted you. Or she trusted you.
I don't know if the data was great
Okay.
in the end.
But you brought home something.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna get started here. Thank you. All right, everybody. Hey now, it's the last day of school. Give yourself a round of applause. You made it to the end. You made it to the end. You're still here. Way to go. And thank you for showing up here on the last day of classes. Finals are happening next week, of course, but this is a great opportunity to get one more jolt of new information from a really dynamic person who's been teaching for us this quarter. And many of the structural geology students are right here, ready to go, ready to support Max. I have no announcements. I have nothing to say what's coming next week or the week after because we're done, except to say Hannah Shamloo and I are already starting to put together a speaker series for the fall and even beyond that. So we'll be back doing these in late September, early October. So looking forward to seeing many of you, not all of you, because some of you are graduating, but many of you. We'll see you again back here in this room next academic year. So without further ado, can I introduce our speaker? This is Max Needle, and Max grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania, got an undergraduate degree there, got a master's degree emphasizing structural geology at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and currently he's wrapping up a PhD in structural geology from the University of Washington. So I don't know the story on how we were lucky enough to get Max to come here and teach for us this spring, but he's been here every week working with a subset of our students, and I've heard glowing reports about Max's work with Geology 360. So I'm excited to hear this talk today. What's the talk, you say? The title is Designing Video Game Style Field Geology Simulations for Research and Education. Would you help me please welcome Max Needle?
Thanks, everyone. I'm Max Needle. Mattathias is my real name. It's optimized for search engines, so if you want to look up any of this research after the talk, you can type in Mattathias Needle. Also give QR codes to some of the sites I'll be talking about at the end of the talk. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my work in designing structural geology-related field simulations using video game building software. Throughout this talk, I'll be referring to them as virtual field excursions, simulations, and often as games. But I think that they're a little more than games in that they're open-ended, or they can be made to be open-ended. Historically, the emergence of geoscience in Europe and North America was closely tied to objective descriptions of outcrops and the discussion of observations in the field. The practice dates from at least the time of James Hutton in the 1780s. And the tradition continues in modern field conferences and field trips associated with professional geoscience assemblies. This is a list of the upcoming field trips associated with the Geologic Society of America meeting that's taking place in my home state, in the city of Pittsburgh, in October of 2023. Contemporary geology education recapitulates this process with bachelor degrees commonly culminating in a required capstone field course. On the left, we have a pic of University of Washington students. I'll refer to it as UW for the rest of the talk. In the field course last summer. In the center, we have some CWU students currently in a senior field course. And on the right, we've got Daryl Cowan teaching a field course last summer. He's using a long stick to point something out at an outcrop, and I'm sure he wished he had a jetpack for when he was leading that field experience. So we're all here because we're curious about geology. Some of us have been inspired or re-inspired in geoscience because of an outcrop we visited. I imagine that there's some outcrops that we wish we could have spent more time at, or we wish we could have visited, and we no longer have access to them. This is Hutton's unconformity at Sicker Point in Scotland, which solidified Hutton's views on uniformitarianism, which was pivotal for the field of geology. And I've never been there. I've always wanted to go to this geoheritage site. Wouldn't it be cool if you could remotely visit Hutton's unconformity at Sicker Point in first-person perspective? Even better, what if you had access to tools that we use in the field for geologic mapping? Today, I'm going to talk about how I've developed a pipeline for any geology researcher or educator to take a 3D model and generate an immersive, shareable virtual field trip to share with fellow researchers or geoscience students. So what am I going to talk about today? I'll start with the inspiration for this work. Then I'll describe what I mean by a pipeline. Then I'll explain the process through which you can develop your own virtual field experience and share it. Then we'll cover data collection within these field experiences, both the tools available to the user as well as what's under the hood. Then I'll give some examples of how I've used these virtual field experiences for education. And finally, I'll talk about where I think this might go in the future and how we can use these virtual field experiences. This work is a collaboration with my advisor, Juliet Kreider at University of Washington, as well as with Jackie Mook and John Ankers, who are affiliated with the University of Washington Reality Lab Incubator, which is under the umbrella of the Computer Science Department at UW. The inspiration. There's been a number of conversations happening pretty recently in geoscience that inspired this work. One is that we have a lot of available point cloud data at the moment. That's because we have public repositories for LiDAR data, and drones have become more affordable. So there's this process called structure from motion, photogrammetry, where you can piece together photos from a handheld camera or drone and develop a 3D model from that. How many ways can point clouds benefit the scientific community? Next, 3D spatial reasoning. In structural geology, some of you who have taken it might have noted that stereo nets take a little bit of time to understand. They're a 2D representation of 3D information. How can we leverage visualization tools in the digital realm to aid in developing this skill? There are outcrops at risk. There's sites of geoheritage that may be subject to natural erosion processes, urban development, or they're on private land and hard to access. Furthermore, imagine hundreds of geology students visiting these popular outcrops with rock hammers every year. And I think that's a version of erosion as well. So how do we preserve outcrops for the reproduction of findings in future study? Inclusion. Geoscience is one of the least diverse fields in STEM. Part of that may be attributed to having these capstone field courses, which can be inaccessible to some folks. For example, they can be expensive. You have to take time away from your family and time away from work to go on them. And people with locomotion differences might notice it's hard to traverse some of the terrains that you have to visit while you're on a field course. How can we be more inclusive as a community and give people the experience of identifying rocks in situ, plotting them on a map, making a geologic map, and then doing a cross-sectional interpretation of it? Lastly, and this is very recent, the pandemic highlighted the need for these remote virtual field experiences. So there's this outcrop that I'm curious about for a couple of reasons. One, it's part of my PhD, and I've been thinking about these questions in the framework of this outcrop. And that outcrop is the Whaleback Anticline, which is in Shamokin, Pennsylvania. So on the left, we have a map of the Northeast. The red marker represents where the Whaleback is. Notice the Appalachian Mountains take a bend there, so they're folded. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a LiDAR image of a fold that's within that bend in the mountains. And the little red circle in that image is the location of the Whaleback Anticline. So the Whaleback's a fold within a fold within a fold. and it's in the anthracite region of Pennsylvania. In the Pennsylvanian geologic time period, this was just a little south of the equator, and it had tropical dense forests. During the Alleghenian or Appalachian orogeny, this region became a fold and thrust belt, and the organic material from the dense forests became coal. In the first half of the 20th century, this coal was excavated in Pennsylvania, revealing a sandstone surface that was folded. What you're looking at is an aerial view of a point cloud of the Whaleback anticline. And notice that it's next to two other folds. We have an anticline in the north and a fold in the south. And I think that it's part of one long fold train. It's one continuous sandstone surface, but in between the folds, there are troughs with mine tailings in them. And so it's hard to see if these surfaces are connected. But the Whaleback and adjacent folds are probably a good example of buckle folding. Buckle fold theory is when you have a strong layer of rock, a competent unit, surrounded by a more ductile matrix. If you apply layer parallel shortening to this area, you can get buckling of the competent unit. And the Whaleback may satisfy this because above it were shale and coal, which is why the Whaleback was excavated, and below it there's also coal. And I work on this for my research at University of Washington, particularly looking at the geometry of the Whaleback and comparing where the distribution of strain, fractures and faults, where they are relative to the Whaleback geometry. And we have strain models, end member models, that try to predict where strain would be on these buckle folds. So I'm looking at this natural example of a buckle fold and comparing it to our predictive models using differential geometry such as curvature. In order to look at the overall geometry of the Whaleback, my research group had a drone campaign. We took photos, and then I put those photos together using structure for motion photogrammetry to generate a 3D point cloud. Now we're looking down roughly the axis of the Whaleback. As you see photos of the Whaleback, you'll notice that there's a lot of trees and vegetation, and in this, I've removed most of it. So I think that's pretty neat. It was a painstaking task, but I really get to get at the geometry of the folded sandstone. The Whaleback is a popular field trip destination for schools throughout the Northeast. I've even heard of schools in Michigan traveling all the way to eastern central Pennsylvania to visit the Whaleback. And that's because it's like a one-of-a-kind exposure of a fold at this scale, and it's exposed in 3 dimensions. So visitors can walk along the crest of the Whaleback. They can also walk adjacent to the limbs. But the Whaleback is really high, and if you fall off the crest, it's bad news. Also, that means if you're collecting data there, a lot of that data is inaccessible without specialized climbing gear. I'm also invested in this place because I visited this as an undergrad at Kutztown University during our field methods class, and I thought it was a really cool site. Access at the Whaleback is complicated. It's on private land, and permissions from the company who owns it are evolving. It's physically rigorous to hike and climb around, and there are some hard to collect measurements. Lastly, there's some geographical limitations. I would have loved to have taken the structure class here at CWU to the Whaleback for a day, but that would be pretty expensive and consume a lot of time. So I'm going to propose a potential solution to some of these access issues, and that is what I've been working on, this structural geology query toolkit for first-person perspective field simulations. And in these simulations, the user chooses where to make the observations and what data to collect. So I've mentioned video games and pipelines, and this is the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear those 2 words. So let me clarify what I mean by a pipeline. It's a pipeline for generating your own game. If you have a 3D outcrop model, you can download Unity software, which is a video game engine. And then you can download our geology toolkit and user interface, open it within Unity, open up your 3D model, and produce a custom game to share with fellow researchers and students. Unity is a game engine. And so it builds to different targets. You can build to virtual reality like the Oculus, smartphones, tablets, desktop computers. And when I started this endeavor, my intention was to build to virtual reality and smartphones. But the pandemic happened and we changed gears to build towards something called WebGL, which is very accessible. All you need is a computer and an internet browser and an internet connection to have access to these games. The issue with Unity is it requires a lot of coding. And this is the Unity interface, and you can see at the bottom, there's all these # files. Those are all C# scripts, they're codes. And these codes govern how the user can interact with the game elements and also how the game elements interact with each other and the math behind some of our structural geology measurements. So there's a lot of coding involved. Our contribution is this toolkit where we've done the coding up front so that you don't even have to do any coding. You can, if you're very comfortable with that, design your own stuff within our software as it's open source. We've taught workshops at conferences, 2 national GSA conferences and 1 sectional one. And the last one we did that was related to the Denver GSA conference in 2022, we did remotely. And we were able to bring in people from all around the world to participate. So this upcoming October, we're also offering the short course again, and you can go to the GSA Connect's website and sign up for it. So I want you all to take a moment to think about an outcrop that's important to you, one that has sentimental value maybe, that you want to share with other people, either because you wish you had more time to collect data there, or you wish that people around the world could experience what you experienced doing field geology at the outcrop. And as I go through the rest of the presentation, I'll be using the whaleback as an example most of the time, but I encourage you to think about your own outcrop in place of the whaleback. So our code is stored on a GitHub page. I'll offer this QR code later in the presentation. And GitHub is a repository for computer code. So you go to our GitHub page after downloading Unity. You can download our code. And then we actually have a wiki step-by-step how to design your own virtual field excursion. And you could try this without even doing the short course. When you open up our code in Unity, you're presented with this model. We call it the dummy scene. And all of the game elements here I made in a 3D graphic design program called Blender. And they're yours if you use this. You can populate your outcrop with trees and cartoon rocks. There's even an animated fireplace. But the purpose of this is actually to help orient the designer to the Unity 3D space. There's a north arrow at the top and a scale. So often when you build these 3D models with structure for motion photogrammetry, they are geo-referenced. And Unity might have a different coordinate system than the software in which you built your 3D model. So you bring in your 3D model, here's the whaleback, but it's not oriented properly relative to the horizon. So you're going to rotate the model. Usually it's in 90-degree increments. After you rotate it, you apply textures to it. Textures are like JPEGs or PNGs, digital photos that have the color information that lay on the polygon. Then you put down your first person character. That's this little pill here. It's scaled to my height. And And you can choose where the user would start out in the video game space, like where they're looking first. And then all you have to do is scale that first person character if you need to. Like you could shrink them down to fit into small places or scale them up. If your outcrop model is like 5 kilometers long and you want them to be like a giant walking over mountains, think of Marvel's Ant-Man as an example of just like changing perspective. I'm pretty excited about this and I haven't spent enough time on it, but taking, let's say, a rock that's been faulted, that's like the size of a desk, and doing a 3D scan of that, and then shrinking down the first person character so that you're measuring these faults on like meters scale. You could do that with this software. At this point, you're able to build the game and share it, but I'll show you a couple of other optional design features. So we have pop-up UIs. Now, the way this works is you drag in a hammer. We've got an animation of this. You drag in a hammer from our files in Unity, and you just place it at the outcrop. And then every hammer you can associate with a 2D panel on which you can store other information like text. You can even include hyperlinks and photographs. And this does take away from the open-ended virtual field experience because it creates a checkpoint. But imagine if you had a student at an outcrop where they had to identify the rock based on thin sections and cross-polarized light that you embedded in this 2D panel. That could be quite instructive. Another option is you can just change the sampling radius of some of these tools. You can change the speed of the first-person character. For larger terrains, you'd probably want the first-person character to move fast, and for smaller terrains, move more slowly so that observations are easier. Some of the platforms to which we've built are WebGL, Mac and PC standalone. These are cool because you don't have as many limitations on file size. WebGL, you have to account for somebody's internet speed. But if you have a standalone game, like the Whaleback is like 300 megabytes in the standalone version, so you have much higher resolution. There's also There's also smart devices. Sorry about that. Yeah, and now it's a good time to take a drink. Oh, the coffee's good. Yeah. All right. Let's take a look under the hood before we go into how the user can collect data in these virtual field experiences. So you have a 3D point cloud model. And usually in these processes of developing these models, the next step you could take would be generating a 3D polygonal mesh. And these meshes have vertices and they have polygons, and there are face normals associated with each polygon. So what are the mechanics of collecting the data from meshes in our code? Well, you're the first person character and you have a camera fixed to your head. When you see something of interest that you want to take the orientation of, a click of the mouse casts a ray from your perspective to the outcrop, and it will collide with a polygon or maybe several polygons. And because each polygon has a face normal, our code reads the coordinates of that face normal, the XYZ coordinates of that face normal, and then it gets converted into numbers that we more commonly use in geology, like strike and dip, and trend and plunge. Now we get to take a look at what are the tools you get to use. So this is the Whaleback. You can move around on the ground If you're playing a desktop version, you can use arrow keys, or if you're a gamer, WASD. Where we stopped is actually, there's a tire in the strip mine, and right next to that, there's a little orange thing. That orange thing is a target where we took high precision GPS coordinates, and in the structure for motion process, you can tag these targets to increase the accuracy of georeferencing your model. Next up, changing perspective. You can look around by just dragging your mouse. It has the opposite sense of Google Earth. This is a field simulation. You're not playing a godlike character just rotating the world. So it's the opposite sense. You can also use a jetpack. That's in the corner right there. Yes. And so the jetpack enables you to change your elevation, and then you can look around and move around using the jetpack. I'll be honest, almost everybody uses the jetpack. It's it's way easier. But as a designer, you could remove it if you wanted to force your students to walk around the whole time. All right, so let's talk about planes. Let's imagine these are horizontally oriented beds. And I'm a structural geologist, so I like deformation. So let's tilt them a little bit. And so now deformation has occurred. And as geologists, we want the orientation of these rock beds to put on our geologic map and then make a cross-sectional interpretation. So how would you do this in the video game world? Take a strike and dip. Well, a plane can be defined by 3 points, right? So the way we've set it up in this game world with the StereoNet tool is the user generates a plane by clicking on 3 points of the surface, and from that, they get a strike and dip. So our code is reading the normal to the plane that's generated by the user. And the user has to decide how wide or how big and small to make these planes, depending on the data they're trying to collect. The strike and dip are printed on the screen at every measurement, and they're projected into the StereoNet graph, which is the way structural geologists like to communicate orientations of lines and planes in 3D space. This is a boxier fold at the whaleback. There's some spray paint on it, actually. Speaking of preserving outcrops. And we're going to take some measurements here. Because they're kind of two planar surfaces, take a look at how they're represented in the StereoNet and how their planes will intersect. But the StereoNet can be hard to understand sometimes, especially when you're getting started. So we've created a 3D toggle switch that allows the user to see the planes dipping in the StereoNet in real time as they're collecting the data. So you can toggle back and forth between 2D and 3D views of the StereoNet. And I've seen firsthand students using this and like light bulbs. The data you collect gets stored in the dashboard, and you can create as many StereoNets as you want for your field campaign. But what makes this a potential research tool is the ability to download the data you collect. So you can download the data as a text file, where it's just strike and dip and then the numbers, or you could download it as a file formatted for Rick Allmendinger's StereoNet 11 to do some more StereoNet analyses. Some of us who have done field mapping have encountered this situation where you have some beds and you want to take the orientation, but their exposure is kind of hard. Like the ledge is kind of hard. So you'll take your field notebook and shove it into a crevice, or maybe you'll take your, what's it called? A clipboard, as long as it's not metal. Remember that. You'll take your clipboard and shove it into a crevice, and then you'll take your geodetic compass or Brunton and measure that orientation. We wanted to simulate that. So we designed this thing called the 2-point plane tool. This is where you would click 2 dots on that surface where you want to take a planar measurement, and then you have the ability to rotate the plane to estimate the orientation of the beds from which you want data. It's not as easy to use as the 3-point plane, but neither is shoving your field notebook in a crack. All right, so because I study folds, this has an extra feature for pie plotting, and I'm not going to go into great detail about what that is, but a pie plot is just where you take bedding measurements, and then you take those poles to the planes, and all of those poles may line up on a plane, or you find a plane that best fits those poles. Think of sticking a bunch of toothpicks into the top of a fold made out of Play-Doh, and then fitting a sheet of paper to those toothpicks. And the orientation of that sheet of paper, well, the normal to that could be the fold axis. So I have a little animation I made for that. We've got the planes in red and the poles in green. And this is what a pie plot looks like, where these poles to the planes are plotted as dots in the stereo net. And we have a best fit curve to them, which is a plane. And the star out on the right is the fold axis. Well, we simulated that in the video game environment with the pole tool. The pole tool is really the Swiss Army knife of this software. The user here is planting flags on the surface of the whaleback to try to get the trend and plunge of the fold axis to be able to communicate the orientation of the fold in 3D space. Even though they're planting poles, strike and dip is being reported on the screen numerically, and in the stereo net, the poles are being represented as poles. So here we're making a scan line across the whaleback to get the trend and plunge of the fold axis at that point. You hit pie plot, and there you go. Red dot in the upper right-hand corner, that's the orientation of the fold axis. Keep that in mind for later. If you've got linear features like slicken lines that record movement along the faults, you can just click on 2 points along the line, and you'll generate a line in 3D space. And there's some light color in the stereo net, but now we're going to look at them in 3D, and I'm going to orient the stereo net to where it's about oriented in our perspective in the video game environment. So you can see how these lines are trending and plunging, and we see that reproduced in the stereo net in 3D. There's a map button. You click on this, and you get a view, an aerial view that's ortho-rectified. You also get to see your position in the game and what direction you're looking. So that's us right there, the little yellow dot. There's also a measurement tool, a profile making tool, which you can do just free form, or you can make 2 selections on the ground, and then we generate a vertical plane that goes through those 2 points, and that helps you stay on path for generating a profile. There's a text tool where you can put 3D text anywhere throughout the world. Juliet, my advisor, is seated here in a subsequent picture, so stay tuned for that. There's also a 3D drawing tool. This can be really helpful if you're drawing geologic contacts in 3D space. You recognize 2 different rocks, you put a contact in, or it's really good at like tracing cross-cutting relationships of faults and then screenshotting that for further analysis. So now I'm going to talk about how you can use these for education, or some examples of how I've done it. First up, whaleback anticline. We went public with the WebGL build during the pandemic, and to date, we've had over 2,300 plays, and I've had professors from around the world contact me about this game, which is, it's quite an honor. Some of the exercises you would be doing if I were instructing the class include trying to get a description of the orientation of the whaleback fold. So again, you'd be plotting those poles, making scan lines, and I pose the question, does the fold axis of the whaleback vary? Students also can make cross-sectional sketches of the fold train, so incorporating the two adjacent folds, and they can do this using the elevation tool associated with the poles, or they can do a profile and then relate it to a strat column. There's other questions, like kind of what my research is about too, looking at strain, looking at some of the cracks and faults around the whaleback, and taking your observations and relating them to predictive models, kinematic models of where strain could be on a fold. But this is an open-ended game, so instructors can design their own tasks for students. Another example I'll share is this Northwestern Washington video game. Juliet Kreider typically teaches a course in the winter at University of Washington where the culminating experience is the lab room has rocks situated throughout it. And students walk around the room, identify the rocks, plot them on a map of the room, and then make a geologic map from the spatial distribution of those rocks and their identities. Then they have to make a cross-section and interpret the geologic history of what they're doing. So during the pandemic, I took one of these modules and converted it to a 3D cartoon world. Using a program called Blender, I made these 3D models. And the students were given a LiDAR-looking map of the terrain. That's the cross-section line they had to do, as well as a bunch of numbered outcrops that they had to visit. They were also given a topo profile on which they had to draw a cross-section. How did this work? Well, students were meeting on Zoom in breakout rooms, and there'd be somebody navigating with the map and another person taking notes like strikes and dips in a shared Google sheet. And another person, usually the most experienced gamer, would be flying around. I saw some very impressive navigation. And so they go to an outcrop. So here's some blocky outcrop where they would measure the strike and dip of this rock. And they would click on the rock hammer and get some information about the rock identity. So they'd identify the rock, plot it on their maps, and then move on with the purpose of creating a geologic map of the region. This is modeled a little after the geology in Western Washington. So I included some of the wildlife that you would normally find if you were camping in Western Washington. You know what I'm talking about. So back in 2018, Mike McGroder, who's an instructor for UW Geology Field Camp, wanted to create new base maps for our field camp that would go out to Montana. And we did it together where I flew a drone and then made these 3D models, but brought them into GIS to make base maps. And the result was, during remote instruction, I actually had these cool 3D models of places we would normally go at field camp to share with the students. So I have an exercise based around some folds here on this mountain. This is the Block Mountain region, for those of you who have done Montana field camp. I also made another cartoon world. This is just simplified fold geometries where the user can look at fold orientations and how they're represented in the stereo net. I'm currently developing a framework for an NSF-supported, very large-scale virtual field experience with a collaborative team led by co-PIs Kaylee Condit and Margot Odlum. And this is going to have multiple scales of information in it. So there will be like larger terrains, close-ups of outcrops, and then beyond that, petrology information and thin sections. So stay tuned for that. It's very expansive project. I'm excited about it. So I'm gonna move towards the end with posing the question, how can we use games like this to enhance in-person field instruction? And I don't have all the answers, but I'll share with you my thoughts. So if we have these virtual field trips, and let's say there's an outcrop that you take your students to, do you give this to your student, the virtual version, before you go into the field, or do you do it after? There's probably benefits to both, right? So if you do the in-person field trip first, students can collect a lot of data, and then they get the virtual field trip where they can go back and maybe collect data in regions they didn't get to, or maybe that were hard to access. The flip side to it is that if you do the virtual field trip first, students can plan their field campaigns before going out into the field and potentially be more efficient with their time. Also, for people who maybe didn't grow up with the cultural experience of like camping and hiking, having this virtual field trip first might decrease some of the anxiety about going out to the field. So this is Juliet sitting on top of the whaleback. Look at all that vegetation. It's not in the model when you play the game, but she's playing a very early version of the whaleback game that I made on my oversized iPad. And that was kind of cool to like sit on the outcrop and then fly around and get a perspective of it that didn't have trees. So this may have some advantages to it regarding field education, as long as you're not like glued to your phone and you walk right off the whaleback. Can VR enhance remote field experiences? Last GSA in 2022 is actually when I met Ann Egger for the first time, to my knowledge. I was doing this demo, this technology demo at the exhibition hall, and there's Jackie, and we're demoing the virtual reality. Imagine if you're a researcher and you can't visit your outcrop for one reason or another, but your research team, other people can. So they go out, they can scan the outcrop, bring that back to you, and then you could interact with it in VR and maybe get a different sense of ownership over the data by that immersive interaction. This is what it looks like at the whaleback. You have a projectile handheld thing. I don't want to call it a gun, but you shoot at the outcrop to create data. You also can hold the stereo net in one hand while collecting the data. It's really cool. Just like in the WebGL version, you can organize the data and download it. We've been working on a function where you can actually download it and it shows on a map where you've collected the data from. So for my master's, I worked with analog models of wet clay, and I would be really jazzed to take a 3D scan of one of those models or an upcoming model that somebody makes and experience it like Ant-Man, but in virtual reality, and take orientation measurements off the faults in that analog model. Also on the right, as we get more data from the ocean floor and from other planets, and the resolution of it keeps increasing, we're going to be able to do structural geology on those surfaces too. And leveraging the video game software to do that may be an advantage. So let's go back to that outcrop that you were thinking of initially. And maybe you've thought of what that would look like in this video game space, and maybe you would add an extra tool to it. Maybe by sharing that virtual field experience, you would inspire people to go there in person. So I want to thank my collaborators on the whaleback research, as well as all of the support that I've received for this research. But I'd like to thank the community here at CWU for making me feel very welcome as I was an instructor here this quarter. Regarding my class, I'd like to thank Ann Egger for providing me a framework for the course. I'd like to thank Garrett for being a very responsible TA. And lastly, and most importantly, I'd like to thank the students for making this a great quarter. I got really lucky. I learned a lot from you, and thank you for exploring structural geology with me for the past few months. Thanks. Right. For those of you at home, here are some QR codes. First one is for virtualfieldgeology.com. You can just type that into your browser. That's where the whaleback game lives. I think the folds are there too, probably some others in the near future. And if you're into gaming and you want to try building your own virtual field experience, you can check out the GitHub repository at that link, that QR code. Or you can just check it out to see what kind of steps are involved in doing it. Yeah.
Okay, well, hey, let's do some question and answer. And Max is going to repeat your question so that the home crowd can hear your question. And I'm also letting you know that we're going to continue this discussion down at the TAV out in the back patio starting about 4 o'clock. We've got a couple tables reserved. So you're welcome to join us down there and celebrate Max and celebrate each other. Question, Tim. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So the question was about how can we improve data collection on other planets to give us the possibility to explore those terrains in this video game space. Is that a good version of it? I don't know this for a fact. There's probably some people in the room who know it for sure, but the rover has a TLS on it, right? Like it's able to take LiDAR data, I'm pretty sure. So from that, we are already able to generate point clouds. It's also taking photographs, which we can, and NASA, if you're listening, I don't know this for sure, but I've seen these terrains, so it must be the case. And stitching together those photographs. So I think we already have access to that data. In terms of increasing the resolution, I don't know. I think our ability as humans just to transmit data back and forth, as that increases, we'll have higher resolution for these games. You have a follow-up?
Oh.
Say before, some of these tunnels collapse, we go through and essentially image them and try to stay away, and like now also have access to that information now with this point as well.
Yeah. At the short course that we ran in Lancaster, PA, for a sectional GSA conference, there was a professor there who had a 3D scan of the interior of a mine, or a cave, and we didn't get to completion with that particular data set during that course, but people are trying that.
Sven at home asks, can this toolkit work with paleomagnetic drill places and the data from it?
Paleomagnetic drill places. Sven, are you asking if we can embed the paleomag data for like the user to access?
Probably.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
There we go. Zane.
So you're creating all of this in Unity with the, I guess, more publicly available Unreal Engine, and especially Unreal Engine 5. How do you see this progressing through that?
Okay, so the question was
Thank you.
about the game engine I used is Unity, and then there's another game engine called Unreal, and it was I'm going to reinterpret it to, did I make the right decision using Unity as opposed to Unreal? I don't know the answer to that. Jackie, my collaborator, could probably discuss it for a while. He might be in the chat at the moment. But both of these are video game engines. And at first there was a lot of discussion on which one to use. I was more comfortable with Unity when I started by myself. And I just found at that time that there were more YouTube videos that could describe to me how to make advances. And so I worked on this alone for a while. And when I got connected to the University of Washington Reality Lab, like on day one, we had a couple of undergrads and I showed them what I had. And I was like, I just want to get to this point. And they're like, well, what's your dream? I was like, to be able to do strike and dip and like have a 3D stereo net. And they're like, okay, we don't know what that means, but yeah, let's do it. And so we did that. And Jackie Mook in particular has really run with the coding aspect of this project. So I don't know the answer to that. I hope Unity sticks around for a while. Yeah.
I guess it is probably more user-friendly to code something of this magnitude.
Also, there was this game called Monument Valley, which I played on my phone. I'm actually not a big gamer, but I recommend this if you like geometry and MC Escher, the artist. It's like MC Escher style puzzles, and it's very relaxing. And that was made in Unity. So that was part of the inspiration. Yeah.
Are you using the LiDAR data to build the 3D model of it? Because LiDAR, as I understand, can read virtually what is organic on the ground to be able to say where the trees are and what the surface of the ground is. But in your point cloud, there's all X, Y, Z of this and this, that you've got every different layer. Does it pick up the hardness of the ground, of whether it's with the, so that you can be able to build the contour lines of what your strike and dip plates are, is that are exposed?
Could you repeat that, Matt?
So yeah, and I'm gonna sort of reformat the question, and please correct me if I misinterpret it, okay? So the question I think is about LiDAR data versus the point cloud data that I was showing from the whaleback. And you're correct. LiDAR data can remove the vegetation, and we can format that in a polygonal mesh and use that as a terrain within this video game environment. we used, because of the affordability of the drones now, we use structure from motion photogrammetry. But one of the current downsides to the structure from motion process is because we're using pictures, it does bring in all of the trees. And so I had to manually remove them. If we had used a terrestrial LiDAR and scanned the area, or we had some flyover do the LiDAR, I would not have to remove the trees.
Catherine.
How long, if you could estimate, did it, like, the field work reconnaissance take to just collect the data for the wheelback?
What's the question?
The question was, thanks, Nick. The question was, I forgot. The question was, how long did it take to collect the data at the whaleback? So the data was collected before I started my PhD. That was done by Keith Hodson, who's a former PhD student of Juliet Kreider. And he's also a friend. And as I understand it, he checked it out 1 year, and then the second time he went back, it took a day to set up the targets. So that was that orange thing I pointed out where the precision GPS markers were taken, which aids in the construction of the point cloud. So it took a day to set those up, and then another day was the drone campaign. With the drone campaigns, you're limited by the battery life. So the batteries go pretty fast. So you need a lot of batteries to get through the day, but also the position of the sun, right? So there's a lot of color information that is used in this process. And if you have the sun changing position over a period of time, that's going to make the rocks look different, like a different color. Like some of it is the whaleback sandstone surface in some places looks like chocolate in some of the photos, and it was not matching with other parts of the data set. So it's best to do it when it's a little overcast, because then the sun doesn't affect you as much. And it's best to try to do it all in one shot. I've actually spent several summers droning this area on a beach near Seattle where these folds are exposed only during the lowest tide of the year. So you only have 1 day to do it. That's kind of fun. I've done it a couple of times.
One more for Max. There, Steve.
Yeah, me being kind of a low tech guy, this takes geology to a real high tech level, which is very useful. I can see how it would be very useful. But direct field observation would still be the backbone and integral part, I guess, is the question. It's not going to diminish, how much of the direct field.
Yeah, so Steve paid me a compliment on my work and then followed it with, this isn't going to diminish actual field work, right? That's basically what she said. And yeah, I agree with that. This is about expanding access more than it is about replacing field work.
Austin, did you have your hand up? Would you like to ask your question?
I just wanted to know, so I saw that you had the link to be able to play the thing on the browser and how to make your own thing. But do you have like a demo version that if I was at home and I took out my VR goggles, do you have somewhere that I can download and look at and all that?
Oh,
Can
we
you repeat
haven't shared the VR publicly. You're not the first person to request it.
Thank you.
Okay. And so the question was, can you access the VR? Can you access the VR version of the whaleback field experience? And so the data for the whaleback was supported, the data collection was supported by the NSF. So at the end of my PhD, that's going to go in a repository. And at that point, anybody can use the data to make their own models and do their interpretation. But while I'm still trying to eke out like a few last statements about the whaleback, I've refrained from making it publicly available, but I think that fear may not be justified. You can send me an email and we'll talk further about that.
Great. Hey, let's thank Max one more time for a great talk. Thanks for coming today. We'll see some of you down at the tab at 4 today. Otherwise, have a good summer. We'll see you next fall. Goodbye. That was great.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Oh, you bet, man. You've got to feel good about that, don't you?
Yeah, I think it was a good talk.
Oh, man. Your pace, your style. I'm going to turn you off. Your pace, your style, the combination of elements.
Thank you. I
Good
appreciate it.
stuff. Okay, let's wrap up here and say a couple final words to you all, if I can find the right camera. Hey, how's it going?
Can you do me a huge favor?
Yeah.
One of my family friends back home is actually like a huge fan of yours.
Okay.
And, he would like an autograph if that would be fine.
Well, sure. You want to say hi to him on this
I
camera?
don't know if he's watching now.
Okay. Well, let's let me. I'm sorry. Yeah, let's do an autograph. Sure. Can you grab me do you have a piece of paper and pencil?
Washington State postcard thingy.
Oh, that works.
That we gave out a while ago.
That works. I'll be right with you guys. Hang on. What's your friend's name? Oh no, you gotta. Oh, you've typed it out for me. For my super fan, Rich Mulcahy. Where does Rich live?
Connecticut, back where I'm from. He was
Nice.
an old neighbor of ours before we moved. So.
This is fun.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, man. I'll look for you out at the bike rack next time, okay? Okay, a couple final things here, and then we'll say goodbye with this live stream series for the summer. But I can promise that if you enjoyed this format and you're like, I don't know what we're talking about right now. Well, it's these. Wait a minute. Hang on. I got to get Max off camera. This was an experiment. I mean, we've always had Friday seminars, as we used to call them. And, no cameras, no live streaming, none of that. But when we started to kind of get this Friday talk thing back going again after the pandemic and everything else, I said in a faculty meeting, hey, I've got this channel. People are really interested in geology through this channel. I would like to give it a try. I would like to actually make this an effort to not only broadcast live, but at least record these things so that people can see young, talented people like this on YouTube. And I'm happy to report that all told, I think there's like 15 or 16 of these that we've done this school year, starting last October. More than 200,000 people have watched these, and many of you have watched all of them. So the idea is that it serves many purposes. We're trying to advertise who we are as a department. We're trying to put a spotlight on young people who are doing interesting things that potentially are looking for work. Like sometimes these videos are actually used in job applications because they say, if you want to figure out who I am, well, watch this video and see the reaction of you. See what people are saying about me, essentially. We're also trying to highlight the fact that there's a more diverse group of people working in geology now than there used to be. And instead of just talking about it, I thought, try to broadcast this the best we can. I don't know if the live thing is necessary, to be totally honest. But since I have this ability to live stream stuff that I'm doing, I thought I would try to do this format this way. So I thank you all for watching these Friday talks, and school's out for the summer, so we won't be doing these until next early October, but I think it's been a success, and I want to continue doing these. If just recorded form, fine. Or if you really think that being here live, if many of you like being here live and you feel like that's an important part of it, then that's fine too. But regardless, I'll try to capture these the best that I can. So does that mean I'm not going to see most of you for the summer? Of course not. I'm totally into this Ice Age flood stuff right now. In fact, I'm about to check in my office this video that I just shot yesterday, and I edited it this morning, and it should be ready for me to post. So I'll probably post a new Grand Coulee video half an hour from now after I clean up the classroom. So thanks, everybody. I love you, and goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. USA. USA.